Hi, if you're looking for a sense of freedom and simplicity in your life, this interview is for you. After reaching a personal debt of nearly $30,000, Cait Flanders realized that the consumerism cycle she was in was consuming the best of her. She repaid her debt in 2 years and then decided to put herself up to the challenge of a 12-month spending ban. In her first book, The Year of Less, Cait shares her story, the tears and the lessons learned when transforming an addictive lifestyle of shopping, drinking, and eating into a happy lifestyle of purpose and mindful consumption. So it's a joy and a pleasure to have here with us today, Cait Flanders. Cait, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to do this interview.
We're so happy to have you. Cait, you have a very inspiring story with a beginning that it's easy to relate with. And I would love it if during this interview we could go through your story, and maybe we could start with what was your life like during your swiping years?
Yeah, so I'm someone who basically, as soon as I got my first credit card, which was, I was 19 years old, I basically used it like it was a second bank account. Like it was just free money that I could just use. And I think the story I used to always tell myself was that I would pay it off one day. And so basically, if I didn't have money for something, I would just use a credit card for it. And I will say I wasn't always a huge shopper. Like I didn't fill my home with a lot of stuff all the time, but anytime friends asked like if I wanted to go for dinner or drinks, I just said yes. And then did go through a couple periods of buying a lot of stuff. And yeah, I was in this state of mind where I was always telling myself I would pay it off one day. And as long as I could pay the minimum payment, like as long as I could afford that, then everything would be fine. And then one day it wasn't fine.
Mm-hmm. And then you maxed out, right?
Yeah. In 2011, I maxed out with about $30,000 of consumer debt. So only about $4,000 of that was student debt. It was all consumer, which means it was credit cards, a line of credit, and I'd also financed a car. And yeah, I was only 25 years old and I was making like a decent salary, but not enough that it made it okay that I was spending that much. And so, yeah, being maxed out was just one of the worst feelings I've ever had, sort of in adult life, of decisions you've made that have then taken you somewhere. I remember figuring out I was maxed out. Like for months before that, I had been ignoring my credit card statements, and I would only peel back the corner of the envelope and look at what the minimum payment was. So as long as I kept paying that, I was just like, this will be okay, this will be okay. But I had just this feeling inside of me that also knew this is not okay, and this is going in the wrong direction very quickly now. And then the day I realized I was maxed out, I finally looked at the full balance and realized I was within $100 of my limit, and I had only $100 left in my bank account. Oh. And I had to somehow make that last me for 6 weeks. I wasn't going to get any income for 6 weeks, so I had to somehow make that work. And it felt awful. It felt awful not only because sort of financially I felt like I had kind of hurt any chance I had of having a good, strong financial future, but I'm also the oldest sibling in my family, and so I've always felt like I needed to be a role model, and I just felt disappointed and shamed all around.
Right. And what would you say from those years, looking back now, what would you say was the biggest lesson you learned?
I mean,
up until that part of your story.
Yeah, I think the biggest one probably still is that feeling that I had in the months leading up to it, that like I knew it was what I was doing was not good. So every time I would go to swipe my credit card, it didn't feel good. Like I had this little voice or this gut instinct feeling that was just telling me like, you shouldn't be doing this, and this is going to lead to trouble. But I continually just pushed it down and ignored it. But I think something I'm continually good at checking in with myself is when I feel things like that, is I'm a lot better now at pausing and just really trying to pay attention to where that feeling might be coming from. And which then helps me stop me from making any impulse purchases or just making any bad financial decisions. I used to act very impulsively. And so it's just, I don't know, been a lot more about slowing down and paying attention to what I'm feeling.
Yeah. Pay attention to what you feel inside when you're doing the purchases, right?
Yeah.
And then so then you maxed out, you were almost $30,000 in debt. Can you please share with us, Cait, your debt repayment story? Like how did you get out of that?
Yeah. So the first thing I did do, I will say, is, I mean, at that point, like I said, I had $100. I didn't have enough money to go out and get an apartment. It's kind of weird timing, but I had just come back from trying to attempt to move to Toronto and kind of build this new life for myself. So I was living in my parents' basement, and I just said to them, like, I can't move out yet. Like, I just need a few months. But I physically cannot afford to move out right now. So I was at home for a few months, and in that time just got very serious about it. And knew like I had to take advantage of this because I never wanted to move back home, but I knew it was such a gift to be able to be home for a few months. And so I put everything I could towards my debt in that time. But then I moved out a few months later, and the most important thing I did right from the start was something I'd never done before, which was just tracking my spending. And it sounds sometimes simple, or like that's very common personal finance advice, but the reason it was so important, not only just because you should do it, forget about that. Mm-hmm. It's that when I would write down how much I had spent and on what, like every single time I had to physically write that down, I was checking in with myself if I was okay that I had just spent that money on that thing. And then as I did it a little longer, I already knew. So after a few months, I was like, oh, I'm actually not happy that I'm spending money on Starbucks every day. I don't think it's bad to get takeout coffee, but I'm like, I'm not comfortable doing it every day anymore. So I don't want to keep having to write this down. So instead of writing it down, when I think about going to get coffee, why don't I just make another decision, right? Like it doesn't feel that good anymore, so I will spend less on it now. And so tracking my spending was the most important thing I did. And from there, I did learn how to budget and just learned how to sort of see what I could do with the amount of money I had. Like, I think that's a really important thing I like to tell anyone too, is like, budgeting can sound really restrictive, and it can sound just like formulaic and boring and stuff. I'm like, I don't look at it so much as a numbers thing or like a plan that you have to follow. I think it's really just about building some awareness and then figuring out like, what are the possibilities of things that you could do with the amount of money that you have to work with. So it's just kind of looking at numbers and then looking at life and what's adding value to life and maybe what's not. And I was constantly doing that. So there were months in that, it took me 2 years to pay off the debt. And there were months in that where I was putting up to 55% of my income towards debt repayment. But that also wasn't every month. That was, again, like just checking in with myself, being like, what can I do this month? So some months it was, 10 or 15%. It would just really depend on what kind of was going on. And yeah, it's interesting sort of looking back now, because I also think I probably did somewhat of a shopping ban during those 2 years without calling it that.
Right.
Because I do think that I was very set on the idea of being debt free. That became very important to me because being maxed out felt so awful. I just never wanted to feel that again.
Right. So for people who are facing a debt and wanting to repay it, what would you say are the things that they need to focus on? Because from what you say, Cait, I think that what you were doing is become more aware, being, growing in consciousness with it in respect to your spending. So what would you say they need to focus on the most?
Yeah, so it's funny, as soon as you asked that question, I was going to say awareness,
right.
but in a couple of different senses. So one is that if you know you're in debt, a lot of people are too afraid to look at the actual number of how much debt they have. And I would really encourage, like, that's step number one before doing anything else. Like, just add up the number and know how much debt you have. And from there, also not feeling like, not shaming yourself for it. I think I was so hard on myself in the beginning. And yes, it's unfortunate, that you have to now tackle this situation, but being in debt doesn't mean you're a bad person. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not a bad person because you have debt. You just know that you want something different. So it's really just about creating the awareness of how much you have, because that's just the starting line. And then if the goal is to reach zero, now you know just the time span of maybe how long that might take. And so the awareness starts with really looking at the number there. But then, even just with things like tracking your spending, it is just awareness. And then constantly checking in with yourself. Just check in with yourself, because I will say this forever. Spending money is not bad. I don't want anyone to ever hear my story and think that I'm like anti-spending or anti-shopping. I'm not against spending money or buying things. I'm very much like, figure out what you actually want to spend money on. And then don't sort of waste money on other things. Like, when you're only spending money on the things that feel good, including paying off debt. If paying off debt is making you feel better, make that a big priority in your budget, because you know that it's going to move you just in the right direction. And so it's like every spending decision you're making or every financial decision is just move you in the direction you want to go.
Right. That's awesome. And so after 2 years, Cait, you repaid your debt. Mm-hmm. And then you call this, in your website, I saw that you called the years after you paid your debt, life after debt. Mm-hmm. And then you decided, even when you had paid your debt, you decided to go on a shopping ban, first for 12 months. And can you please share with us what led you to this shopping ban?
Yeah, so I'm so just glad that you understood the timeline. I think some people think I did the shopping ban to get out of debt.
No.
But no, it was this feeling. So I used to do this thing on my blog where I would share my budget at the beginning of the month, like what I thought my numbers would look like. And then I would share the actual numbers at the end. And so the first year that I was debt free, the beginning of every month, I would say, I want to save 20% for retirement. And that should have been doable, because, like I said, like, there were months when I was paying off my debt where I was putting up to 55% towards debt repayment. And that's not sustainable every day.
Right.
But there were months. And so I'm like, I should be able to save 20%. That shouldn't be that hard. But I would get to the end of every month and I would have only saved like maybe 5 to 10%. And then I would have to write a blog post where I explained why I had only done that. And then after 12 months of doing that, like, every single month, it didn't feel good to not be able to do it. Also, and just personally, not because of what anyone else thought, it didn't feel good to me that I hadn't been able to do that. And so I was just like, I know I can do better than this. And so especially when you feel it once a month, every month for 12 months in a row, finally I just had this feeling of like, I need to do something different. Like, I need to just challenge myself in some way. And I remember having this conversation with girlfriends a couple of weeks before I started the ban. And I was just like, I think I'm going to do this thing where I don't spend money for a while. And they were like, just rushed me with a list of questions of, what does that look like? What do you do? And I think just finally talking about it and putting it out in the open, you sort of feel that intention begin to form. And I was just like, all right, I think I'm going to do this. And so it was not only financial, though. I could also look around my home and just see, like, I have stuff, like not tons, but I have like books I haven't even read yet. I had toiletries. I had like an extra bottle of lotion. I had all these kinds of things. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I don't actually need anything. My basics are covered. So why wouldn't I be able to do a challenge like this?
Right. And what did it consisted of? I mean, what did you buy? What did you didn't buy?
So I decided that I would essentially be able to buy anything I consumed. So groceries, obviously, gas for my car, and then anything, or toiletries, like when I ran out of them. And then anything that, like if I ran out of it, or if it broke, but I really needed it, like it was something I used all the time, then I could replace it. So anything that was actually going to be consumed or used on a daily basis, but only if I was like, if I was replacing. So consumables were okay. So then anything that was either not consumable or I just knew I didn't need more of it was on the other list. So the other list was very long of things I was not allowed to buy. So it was like clothes, shoes, accessories, anything for around the house, like anything. So definitely no electronics or furniture or decor, nothing. Like I couldn't buy anything. No magazines, no books. Books were the hardest for me. But like I said, I owned a lot already that I hadn't even read. Mm-hmm. So books were hard though. And then it wasn't that it needed to be on the list, but I decided to do no takeout coffee as well. Because again, I had just gotten to this place where I was drinking it too much, especially I was working at home at the time. I didn't need to be spending like $100+ a month on takeout coffee. Yeah. So I was like, I could challenge myself to this. That one was oddly one of the hardest things to give up. Really? And it's not even shopping, but I think because I had so many habits around it. Right? Like I used to, I would wake up and if I was really tired that morning, like, you know, when you just wake up and you just feel like you can't even get out of bed. Mm-hmm. For some reason on those mornings, it felt like my brain would tell me it would be easier to get dressed and go downstairs because there was a Starbucks in my building. Oh. Than it would be to just make it in my kitchen. Right. I have no idea why, but that's just something I felt all the time. Or especially I think too, working from home, it was almost like a little bit of a social thing too, like not only to go meet friends, but even just going downstairs, chatting with the people working there. Yeah. It is just sort of this thing. So I would feel this like, oh, I should take a morning break and go have coffee. And so it was very hard to break that. And Cait, did you when you started this shopping ban, did you start it with the idea of doing it for a whole year, or did you took it like 1 month at a time or 1 week at a time? I did set out to do it for a year. And looking back, I'm like, I don't know how I even came up with that idea. Yeah. And I also though tell other people now, like, no one has to do what I did. Like, I would never tell anyone you have to give these things up for an entire year. But I can also say that if I had only done it for 30 days or a couple of months, I don't actually know that I would have learned all the lessons I learned. Yeah, and that's my next question, exactly. Because you did the shopping ban for 1 year at the beginning, and then you went on for another year, right? So you did a 2-year shopping ban. And what is most interesting about it, Cait, is what you discovered during those 2 years about yourself and about your life, right? I would be grateful if you could please share a few things that you discovered. Yeah, so I think probably the most important that sort of like overarched all the decisions I used to make about shopping specifically was that I used to buy a lot of stuff for the person I wanted to become or the person I thought I should be. And so very specific examples are like, I used to buy like classic novels because I thought like I wanted to be this smarter, more interesting person who read those kinds of books. But then a lot of them would sit around unread. And I used to buy different creative projects. So one was like, I had hundreds of dollars worth of like scrapbooking material and all these photographs. And I was like, I want to be the kind of person who does that, but then I never did it because it's just not who I am. And so it was so interesting because at the same time throughout the shopping ban, I also ended up getting rid of more than 70% of my belongings. Yeah. And that is what really showed me that I used to buy stuff for this other person. And so I started to pay more attention to the stories I would tell myself when I was out shopping or thinking about buying something. Like, what am I telling myself right now that is making me want to buy that thing? Do I actually need it? Like, for the past month, have I been thinking this thing would really help? Because if I've been thinking about it a long time, it will probably help, right?
Right.
But did I just hear about it, or, a friend told me about it, and I just built up this story in myself, like, I should have that, or I should want that. And I think it was so interesting to have to start changing the stories I was telling myself and just asking myself, like, who I really am, and knowing that, again, it's okay to spend money, it's okay to buy stuff, but buying stuff for like the actual person that I am, not for who I want to be or think I should be. Because I think that's where I've wasted so much money over the years, is thinking that I could spend money and somehow become this better version of myself, rather than actually just like accepting who I am and accepting that my interests may not be the same as all these other people who may be more creative or interesting or smarter than me. Yeah, like, I just have to do what I want to do.
Right. And once you realize it, it becomes kind of, even weird to talk about it. Like, why would you buy something that it's not for you? But we don't realize it. That's the thing. Again, it all goes back to awareness, right?
Yeah, awareness, and just, I think also being willing to hit pause before, because it's so easy, especially now, everything is just making it more easy to spend money. So it is hard. It is hard to be like, no, I want to take a step back from those things, and almost make it more difficult to spend money by saying, like, I'm going to hit pause before every purchase and ask myself why I'm actually about to buy this thing or just spend money on this thing.
Also, to pause before, going out with friends to drink alcohol or to spend on food, going out to restaurants. Also pause on that, right, Cait?
Yeah, and I mean, that's been especially important for me because I think I also, over the past few years have really realized I'm a binge consumer of a lot of things. I quit drinking 5 years ago. That was something that was a very big part of my life up until then. And also just binge eating. And so I think another big lesson that I pulled from that year specifically was that instead of ever dealing with whatever was going on inside of me, I would always just kind of consume something, whether it was buying, shopping, just spending in general, drinking, eating, to just sort of numb it, make it feel better, ignore it, pretend it wasn't happening. And, you can't do it forever.
Right. And so, Cait, moving on to minimalism, because you talk a lot about minimalism, and there's a lot of talk about minimalism now in the world. But it means different things, I think, for different people. So I would love it if you could share. I love your definition of it. I would love if you could share with us, what is minimalism to you?
I think for me, it really just is about asking yourself, like, what adds value to your life? And then only having that. And you can have an abundance of that, like what adds value and what feels good, but getting rid of the things that don't feel good, that don't add value, or that make you feel bad, make you feel guilty or ashamed or anything, like removing those things. So little examples are things like I removed the creative projects I was never going to do because looking at them made me feel bad. Like, I felt bad that I had spent money on them. I felt bad that I never made time for them. And at the end of the day, it's like, I felt bad enough for all those years. Like, some of that stuff I carried around for like 10 years before I finally got rid of it. And it's like, I think I felt bad long enough, and I've paid that off long ago. And at some point, it's just time to let it go.
Right.
And so simple examples are like that. It also translates into things like relationships. You really start to realize there are just some in your life that don't add value. And it doesn't mean like giving anything other than just kind of time and acceptance of who you are. Like, I think that I've really realized over the years, and very slowly let them go, that there are friends or just relationships you have that don't feel good, and very slowly realizing, like, when you remove them or just give them less of your energy, it opens up just time and energy for like good stuff to come in. Exactly. And so it applies to like absolutely everything. Because sometimes I don't like the word minimalism, or like the definition of it just being about stuff. Like when you're like, oh, try to live with just 100 things, or that's not applicable to everyone. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that comes with a certain amount of privilege to be able to say that you can do that. But if you look at it just in this kind of broader sense of how you can apply it to life, I think that is something that more people can accept and just see how it works for them.
And what are some of the benefits that people that adopt this point of view of minimalism, what are some of the benefits that they can have?
I think in a physical sense, when I walk into my home now, I always feel at home. Like I said, you know, when you look in a corner and you see these things you haven't done yet and you feel so awful about it, like I just feel comfortable. It does, on a practical sense, save you time and energy. Like when you do have kind of less clutter and stuff, you have less to clean, which also just takes up mental energy, right? Like when you look around your home and it does feel really cluttered or just like filled with stuff that you don't even want to do. Right. It adds a lot of mental clutter and just kind of mental distress that you don't even think about really until it's gone. And you're like, whoa, I feel just so much lighter. But then do have more time and energy for things. And I think on the friendship level, and even just really identifying, you know, what are your values and stuff like that, like it has the ability, if you let it, to really, I think, just connect on a deeper level with people. Like I think, especially when I used to be such a just binge consumer of things, I was very reactionary all the time, and you just kind of go from one thing to one thing to one thing. And now I'm so much slower and more intentional in the things that I do, and I have stronger friendships than I've ever had, and feel closer with family than I ever have, and I just spend more time with people, and the people who give that back to you and make you feel good too. So I think it's I don't know, widely varying. Like it could apply to so many things, but that's just some of what it's done for me.
Yeah. So maybe it's a sense of lightness, being lighter, feeling lighter, happier.
Yeah. I also think just in the lighter thing, it's like you remove these expectations. I think expectations, especially ones you're just putting on yourself, they can really weigh you down, right? And so once you remove them and you're just like, no, this is what I want, and you just keep moving towards the things that you want, it does feel lighter.
Yeah, and then there's the space for you, right? You have the space for you, for who you really are. That's awesome, Cait.
Yeah.
And what about people who would like to start to have this minimalism point of view in their lives? What would you recommend? Where can they start? How can they start?
Number one, I would say it's not all about the stuff, right? Like it's not all about the stuff in your home. But sometimes I can't deny that removing some of those things that, you know, I've had to realize I don't want to do those things, and I'm not going to be that person. There's no doubt that removing some of that from my home did help. So I don't think anyone needs to go out and, you know, get rid of 70% of your belongings. But I do think that going through your home, and if there is anything that just doesn't feel good, like slowly learning how to let that stuff go at least. I think on the front of maybe like a bit of shopping ban / minimalism, I think something that does, again, it's an exercise that brings awareness, is if you were to go around your home, just walk through every room and write down the 5 things you have the most of. So in your bathroom, it could be like shampoo, conditioner, lotion, soap, shave gel. I don't know. Like just pick like whatever the 5 things are you have the most of, because what it does is gives you awareness of how much you already have, which once you see it too, I think can help you feel grateful for it. I think that's something I'd never done, right? Like I was on this constant cycle of just consuming, and you never practicing gratitude for the things that I already had. And not only does it do that, but it gives you awareness. So when you are out and you think, oh, I should pick up some more of this or that, you actually have like this mental checklist of, I already have enough actually. Like for me, when I did declutter and get rid of some stuff, I realized I had over 50 books I had never even read.
Wow, yeah.
So every time throughout the shopping ban that I would think about buying more books, I could go, no, I have enough.
Right, right. That's amazing, Cait. And if people want to learn more about your story, about your tips and your point of view, really, that it's very refreshing, they can go to your website, right?
CaitFlanders.com. Yeah. Yeah, I hang out there more than anywhere. That and Instagram, actually. I'm actually not that drawn to certain platforms, but Instagram is where I hang out too.
Okay, so what's your Instagram? How can they find you?
Oh, just Instagram.com/Cait Flanders.
Perfect. And your book, The Year of Less, is now available in 3 different continents. So people, not yet in Spanish, but hopefully soon we will see. So they can, buy that anywhere books are sold for, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, things like that.
Yeah, and Indigo in Canada, Waterstones in the UK. It's so cool. It's just so cool that it's out in, like you said, 3 continents at the same time.
Right. So,
yeah.
Cait, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your point of view. Like I said, it's refreshing, and it gives, I'm sure everyone like me is now filled with good ideas of how to feel lighter in our lives. So I thank you for all you do, and thank you for your time today, Cait.
Thank you so much, and right back at you. I think it's so important, the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Cait. Thank you so much. Bye.